Hey everyone, thanks for coming to the webinar. We are just going to wait a couple more minutes before we actually start, just to see, it seems like, we have a couple of attendees kind of coming in. So I'm just going to wait a couple minutes, and while we're waiting, just want to remind you that you can type your questions in the question box, and I'm going to go ahead and show my screen. Sorry, guys. You can type your questions in the question box, and during the webinar, what I'll do is, kind of pause, look at the questions, answer the questions as necessary, and, do that throughout the webinar. Again, the webinar is being recorded, so you will have the recording on YouTube as well as a download file, and that will be done, about 48 hours after the webinar's done, because it has to render and all that fun stuff. So I guess while we're waiting for people kind of coming in, from the last webinar, if anybody has any questions, I'd love to cover those first. And that last webinar, just to as a reminder, is, we talked about lettering. We did a lot of the lettering basics. We talked a bit about small lettering, and this webinar is going to be kind of a continuation of lettering, but different types of stitch styles and different techniques. We're going to go over the 3D or the kind of the puff embroidery. We're going to go over a little bit more on small lettering. We're going to go over lettering that's already been created, and their DST files, a lot of monogram type of fonts, or even fonts that have been digitized for applique. We're going to talk about that stuff and a little bit about outlining as well. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and type your question in the question box. And I guess I'm that good and that nobody has questions. I'm just kidding. Yeah, if you can think of any questions or something that you would like to see regarding the lettering, I'd love to see it, or read it, I guess. All right, so hi to everyone. I hope you guys are having a great week, and I know it's almost the weekend, so I'm kind of excited. It's just been really hot here in St. Louis. We've had a heat advisory, and I believe it's supposed to end tonight, but it's been pretty unbearable, and it's nice that I'm pretty lucky that I do get to work inside in air conditioning. So I'm glad I'm not outside right now. All right, so let's go ahead and start. First of all, can everybody see my screen okay? If you can't, just type in the question box that you're having trouble, and I'll see if I need to change anything. Okay, so it looks like everybody can see my screen. And what we're going to start with, I think, today is a bit of, we're going to talk a little bit about the small lettering, talking, kind of continuation of that. Just as a review with small lettering, we did some things, we talked about a lot of things as far as the settings go in the stitch settings that are better optimized for small lettering. Not only that, we talked about saving those settings and applying those settings, and we'll cover a little bit of that again. But also, sometimes with lettering, you will need to divide up the letters in order for the stitching to be, to fall properly and kind of lessen the bulk. So one big thing that we did talk about with the lettering is the materials that you are using. You know, we talked about the needle size and the thread size. And that's going to be important because of, you know, the needle size. If your needle is larger, it's going to make a larger hole in your fabric, whereas a smaller needle is going to make a smaller hole in your fabric. As you know, and also that goes into the thread size. You know, your thread twist, if it's larger, it's going to have more bulk. It's going to be, you know, it's going to take up more space on your fabric, whereas if you have a smaller thread with a thinner twist, you know, just thinner thread, it's going to take up less space, less bulk, and it's going to come out a lot more, you know, it's going to come out more crisp, and it's going to come out more legible. That's really a huge secret, in my opinion, to small lettering. I have taken designs that are optimized for small lettering, stitched it in a 40 weight thread versus a 60 weight thread, and I'll tell you the 60 weight thread came out, you know, 300% better. It just looked so much nicer and crisper and clearer. The other thing that I really like using on small lettering or any small detail work is water soluble. Creating a barrier in between the, or you know, on top of the fabric, that's going to be helpful because it kind of raises up that that thread a bit, and the needle going through that before it goes through the fabric, it's going to take a better path, in my opinion. You know, you're kind of thinking about this on a micro level, and with it going through the water soluble before it goes through like a weave, it's going to be a little bit more straight, you know, and it helps not sink into that fabric so that it's not pulling and you're not getting those jagged edges. That's a big thing. Water soluble really helps a lot with that. You know, water soluble is not just for you know, fabrics that have loft like fleece, or if it has nap like a terry cloth. It's also for fabrics that might have a weave where the needle, when it goes down into the fabric, it's trying to take the easiest path, and when it's going down and separating the fibers or creating a hole in it, it might slip into, you know, a crevice to where it's going to pull and make that edge look a little jagged. So using water soluble on top is very, very helpful. It can almost make things night and day. I've even used it on leather. For example, some leathers have a texture to it, and you see this a lot on handbags. And with that texture, the needle is going to kind of bend and go into that texture. But if you put water soluble on top, or any type of, you know, barrier on top of it, it helps it make it more smooth. It's one of those things that, you know, you look at, and you look at two different designs that have been sewn with two different you know, two different recipes in a sense, and it's amazing the difference that you can see. So if you do have, you know, the opportunity, if you see some designs that are sewing on maybe a knit fabric that look a little jagged, try a 1 or 2 layers of water soluble and see if that makes a difference. I think it will, and I think you'll see a huge benefit in using it. So all these things tie into you know, having great embroidery. So it's not just the digitizing, and I preach this all the time. It's not just the digitizing, it's not just the machine that makes your embroidery great. It's all the things combined together that make that embroidery great. So it's the needles, it's the backing, it's the topping, it's the hooping, it's the thread, it is the digitizing, and it is the machine too, but it's all of it together. So, you know, understanding that is a big thing. So, a lot of times too, one of the big questions I get and a lot of, advice that people are looking for is that performance wear. Performance wear is becoming very, very popular. They're making, people such as Nike and Adidas are making really nice, casual business, shirts that are made of this performance wear. But with performance wear, you come into some problems because of, the polyester material. It's very, it can be very light. So making sure that you do have the right backing is going to be important, but also the right, having topping makes things, again, like 300% better. I have had designs where people are doing it on performance wear, like, like I said, like Nike or Adidas, and when they're doing the lettering kind of falls into the fabric. And again, if you put that water soluble on top, it makes a huge difference. So with performance wear, because it is more of a flimsy fabric and it's a lighter fabric, you need to make sure that you have a good amount of backing. I use, and this is just, kind of an average thing. It's, again, it's not the same thing on every single fabric. Every single fabric is different, but I typically use 2 layers of a medium cutaway along with a layer or 2 of water soluble on top. That's kind of my base, that's my base foundation for like performance wear. Again, performance wear can be, heavier or lighter. You see ladies' tanks that are lighter weight, and then you see the golf shirts that are heavier weight. And then it also depends on your design that you're putting on there. Is it packed full of stitches? Because if it is, you need more stability. So looking at all those factors is really very important. So, okay, so on with the digitizing part. And another thing, I'm sorry, I'm just going to throw this in there, but when you do look at, the thread and the needles and stuff, I suggest, investing in maybe a sample kit of smaller needles and smaller thread. And I like using the Madeira thread. It just has a really nice sheen. They carry a lot of colors in the 60 weight thread. That's the same as the 40 weight. And typically it's the polyester that you want to use because it is more substantial, it's stronger, and it's color fast. So Madeira does have a lot of 40 weight thread, or I'm sorry, 60 weight thread. That's the same colors, the 40 weight, and then the 65/9 needle, or even going smaller than the 65/9, but this the size 60. As far as the point of the needle goes, it just depends on what you are stitching on. They have the ball point and the sharp point, and if you're doing knit and things like that, I would do the ball point. If you're doing something like one thing too that I tell people is that don't take everything that you hear as as what it is. Experiment. There's not one book out there that's going to tell you everything about embroidery and digitizing, and it's because people find different recipes for what they feel is best for their embroidery. So experiment a little bit. Don't take everything I say as what it is and what it should be and what it's going to be forever and ever. Just take those as little pieces of advice and explore on your own. But investing in the smaller needles, smaller thread, as well as the water soluble, taking a design that might have small lettering, stitch it out in 40 weight and then stitch it out in 60 weight and see what the difference is. It's really mind-blowing, excuse me, what you can see. All right, so after all that, we're going to talk about, again, small lettering a little bit more. So on the right-hand side, I am going to go up to the A for the insert text. We can also go up to create and insert text. But here, I'm just going to type in webinar. And we do have some pre-digitized fonts. And if we scroll up, the pre-digitized fonts are starting with the @ sign. With the @ sign and no TT in front of it or anything else in front of it, that means that it is, pre-digitized. You can see that it is more of a wireframe than actually in the color. And you can see that these areas are more broken up. And that, like on this A right here, you see that that is just one piece. And then this is a piece and this is a piece. So it's actually broken up into 3 different pieces. And that's how it was digitized. Now these ones with the TT in front of it and the @ sign, that's a true type, and you can tell that it's a true type because it is in the preview in the color of my what I have here on the bottom right. So I do want to make sure that I do have it highlighted, and that was just a left click, hold, and drag. And I am going to go into let's just choose one of these and I'll show you how it works. We're going to talk a little bit about serifs as well. Now serifs are the little edges on the end of your letters they're kind of like a little tail, if you will, kind of right here. Is that you see? And we're going to talk about serifs a little bit later, but how we would deal with those in small lettering. The font size I'm going to change to about a 6mm, and we can check mark this small lettering stitch, which will be our settings for small lettering. If you change those settings, it will, if you change those settings and save those settings, it will appear as soon as I'm sorry, let me take a step back. I'm getting too far ahead of myself. Those settings will apply with this check marked. So if you changed this before and saved it, it will save it to your new settings and apply it this way. So we'll go ahead and press OK. And when I press OK, it brings in my letters. I'm going to zoom in here. And now you're going to see that these letters are broken up into separate pieces. Whereas before, I don't know if you remember when we did this, the W was one piece. Now if I right click inside each piece, you can see how they're broken up. And this can be very beneficial in the sewing and in the way, the sewing order. I'm going to go back to insert text, and this time I'm just going to choose, I think I have a regular Helvetica in here. I'll have to check. No, I don't. Let's just choose an Arial, and we'll go ahead and press OK. And you know what, we're going to edit this. We're going to bold it. Okay. And we'll go ahead and press go. So when we do that, our small lettering should be now applied to it. And if you remember from the last webinar, if I right click on here, I'm going to go to my stitch settings. And these are the settings that I did change. If I go to underlay, we now have a center run underlay. I did change that maximum and minimum step. I changed the pull compensation. I changed the satin density, the break long stitch, the maximum step. I changed that in the last webinar, and I saved that as a new setting. So when we do hit the save button, and I save it as small lettering, and if you can't find your properties, it's stored in the C drive, and then under Super Tech, and then IDS, and properties. So you do have all these properties that you can choose from. They're kind of pre-done settings. But if we scroll down and we find the small lettering and then hit save, hit yes, that any future lettering that we do and we check mark that small lettering, it will apply. So we'll go ahead and press here. So if I look at this one and it's all one piece, and I change the in and out points, let's say here and here, and I hit go, you might have some more travel stitches. Whereas this one, when we look at it, and actually what I'll do here, let me right click, hold, and drag, and I will change the color just so we can see a difference between the two. I'm going to scroll up on the left-hand side. Now this is my stitch sequence viewer, and if you don't have that up on the left-hand side, that's going to be under View and Stitch Sequence. But with the small letters, with the predefined lettering or the pre-digitized, what I can do is kind of have more control as to how this stitches. So if I right click here, you can see that this stitches first. I'm actually going to take this in point, bring it up here, and have the out point down here. And the reason I have the out point down at the bottom is one, so it can stitch in one direction, but also so I can have the in point of this guy closest to the out point of this one, because they go into that succession. So this is stitching first, this is stitching second, and I'll then have the out point here. If I place my cursor just over that point, it turns into a four-way arrow. I just left click, hold, and drag. This one, again, I can move it here. You know, sometimes I'll move it up here because it will automatically travel up here. And then this one right here, I can, you know, move it up here. Now, this is also going to depend, this out point here is also going to depend on my area here. Now, if I want to trim in between the two, you know, and that's another thing. But if I do want to trim in between the two, it really doesn't matter where my add point is. It probably would be best suited for that letter. So if I hit go right now, you can see you actually have kind of less travel stitches and whatnot. And if I highlight this letter right here with a right click, hold, and drag, I'm looking at my stitch count, it's 164, whereas I right click on this guy and it's 179. So the difference in stitch count, and actually I'll just move this out point up here so it's the same, and then I'll regenerate. And right click on here again. Oh, it's still 179. So now, granted, we're talking about 6mm letters. So, you know, that difference in stitches, you know, that what is it, 13, 14 stitches, that's pretty big. So we are decreasing the needle penetrations by that much. So having your letters, in a sense, kind of separated can help with that. We can even decrease this even more by changing the tie stitching. We don't need a tie stitch in every single area here. We only need a tie in on this guy and a tie off on this guy, because otherwise they're all connected and there's no trim in between. So if I take this one, right click on it, hold my control key, and right click on this guy, I will then, you know, I have them both selected. I'm going to take the tie stitch out. To do that, we can hit our space bar, or we can go up to the property settings, and I can deselect under options here, use tie stitch. I'll go ahead and press OK. It will automatically regenerate. This one right here, I'll right click, go to the stitch settings, I'll go to the tie off tab and disable the tie off. I still need a tie in, but I'll disable the tie off. Press OK. Right click on this one. I can go to the stitch settings, go to the tie off, deselect tie in, press OK, and now I'll just go ahead and hit the go button, right click, hold, and drag, and I took a couple stitches out. Sometimes it will automatically filter out those stitches, you know, with closest point connection, but I did take out even more. So the least amount of stitches I can have is better, you know, because you want to decrease the bulk, you want to decrease the needle penetrations, all that good stuff. So you can see as I go through here, and again, remember with these letters like the E, now if we look closely at this E, It actually is, it's still one piece, but in a sense it's separated. You can see this line right here. And really it's one long piece that goes around. Whereas this one, if I right click inside of it, you can see there's no black line here and it's not separated here, you know, quote unquote separated. But the program does put in a, you know, I call it an artificial cut line. So if I look at my view angle, and I'll move this angles out of the way, you can see that line. It is putting, in a sense, an artificial cut right there, meaning that it's going to appropriately put the stitches in those directions because it thinks it should be cut there, when in fact it probably should be. This one is cut already manually, and I can see that if I go to the outline view and I'll go to these nodes, and you can see that if I pull it away, there's a space there. So if I did hit the go button right here, you can see it's a space. Whereas on this one, if I go to the outline view, right click on it, go to this, if I pull this away, you know, it's the whole piece. So if I hit go, you know, you do have the stitches bulking out. So you can see the difference on how that is, you know, going to affect. So I'll hit the undo button a couple times. We'll get it back to where it was and generate the stitches. And usually I want to put the end point where I would start writing it. You can see all these stitches in here, these travel stitches and whatnot, and then I'll take the out point and bring it to the end. I'll hit go, and you can see how much that cleans up. So same now with this guy, it's probably similar because it does have that artificial cut line. So I'll do in and out, and I'll hit go. It does clean it up. Sometimes it's hard to get that end point at just the right spot to clean it up more and more. You can see that the stitching here, you know, maybe you need a little bit of an overlap, and that can be done with this one a little bit better because we can go into the outline mode. I think I'm zoomed in as far as I can, and we'll go to the edit mode, and I could take this, whoops, I'm grabbing the wrong thing. Nope. I could take this and overlap it. Now it's going to give me a warning because I'm overlapping itself. And I say, yeah, I do want to do it. Let's just see what happens. And we'll go ahead and hit go. And one thing I do like to check as well is my angles. So I'm going to bring this angle back just so we can see and hit go. And now you can see I've got a little bit of an overlap. So as it starts, it's going to start stitching here, go around, you know, all the way around, and then end here. So now 3D view is not the best view I want to look at, and the reason is because it's a rendering. You know, it's on your screen. You know, it's animation basically. But here, let's go ahead and zoom out. We are pretty far zoomed in. But you can see that those stitches will finish off this guy right here. Again, I don't like to view it in the rendering. It's, you know, it's trying to accommodate for the pull compensation and things like that. I like to view it more in this type of view just because I can see where my needle penetrations are. I can see my my underlay a little bit better, where everything is falling, and really, you know, has a better view that way. The next one, if I've got two parts of this B here, I've got this part and this part. If I right click, and I'm in the outline view right now. Typically, I want this part of the B stitched first and this to stitch second. So the way that I like to stitch this is that if I right click here, I like the end point to be up here, the out point to be down here, and so it'll go in one motion. And if I hit go, you can see that, you know, it decreased all those stitches. The next thing, and I do want to remind you, you do want to keep an eye on your stitch sequence viewer, making sure that it is going to stitch in the correct order. Right click on this guy right here. The end point is down at the bottom, so it's going to travel from here over to here. The out point is up here. I want it to go in one motion. Right click off to the side. I'll regenerate, and you can see how much cleaner it is. Even this E here kind of took a path to go, to just move from here to here. Now if I look at it and I want to measure how long this strand of thread is, I can click on this ruler right here. And when I do that, my ruler turns into a crosshair. I can see the units right next to it. If I left click, hold, and drag from one piece to another, that's only, that's not even a millimeter. We may not even see that, and it might be, better to have that than to actually have a trim, because when you do have a trim, it's going to make more needle penetrations into your fabric. And that's, again, that's a big thing. We want to make sure we want the least amount of needle penetrations. So as we go through this, and as I'm, scrolling through the eye, we're going to see here that, the eye is kind of doing something a little funky. It's wanting to, well, this is after the top of the eye stitches, but it wants to travel over here. So let's do this. First, we'll go on the major part and do in and out point at opposite ends. And then this guy right here, I like those in and out points. I'll regenerate, and it cleans it up a little bit. Now this end, I am going to input a trim in between. With number 9 stitching, if I would like a trim after it, I am going to insert the trim just by left clicking on the trim. And that now inputs a trim, but I still have something kind of crazy going on here. So let's check it out. We'll right click on the end, or the, kind of the bump of the end. I have the in point here and the out point here. So when it finishes, it's going to jump over here and start stitching, and that's not really an efficient way to do this. So we'll take the out point, place our cursor over it, put the out point here, right click. I can put the in point up here, leave the out point down here, right click off to the side, and generate the stitches. Look how much cleaner that gets. So it's quite amazing what you can do with, the letters that are broken up. Last one here. I'm going to do, now this one we could try a couple different things. I'm going to do the end point over here, because this part of the A is stitching first, and then this part. And the out point over here. And then the end point, you know what, let's put the end point here. Sometimes the program does a nice job of traveling in that center up and over. So let's go ahead and hit go. It's a little bit better. Sometimes I will play around with the in and out points to see what's going to be best. And let's see if you can see what I'm doing. I'm just, experimenting with different ones. I do like that the best. So it looks like my end point, I have it here. It's going to run and end here. Then after that's done stitching, it's going to start here, run around, and then stitch down to the bottom here, and it's actually connecting to my R. The R, again, is in 2 pieces. So with this part of the R, I do want my out point to be down here, and that's because, actually I want it to be up here, and that's because it's going to connect to this part of the R. Let's go ahead and take that in point up there, out point at the bottom. And again, the in point and out points, all I'm doing is just putting my cursor over the point, or over the in and out. It turns into a 4-way cross, and then I can left click, hold, and drag to move it. I'll right click off to the side, regenerate everything, and it actually looks pretty good there. So let's go ahead and zoom out. Actually, I'll right click and we'll just zoom to fit, or I'm sorry, yes, right here, zoom all design. So you can see the difference between the two. It may not be a whole lot of stitches in, the whole thing, but again, to decrease the amount of stitching is kind of the big thing here. So if I right click, hold, and drag over the pink, I have a stitch count of 797. If I right click, hold, and drag over the blue, I have 751. So what did I have here? 797. So that's quite a bit of stitches, a difference. And lessening those needle penetrations is going to be a big thing. So I'm just going to pause right now and see if we have any questions. All right. So I hope you guys are just soaking it all in. Any questions? Okay, I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes just to make sure we don't have any more questions. Okay. So question was, will this be replayed? Yes, we're recording this, so you will have the link to see the video either on YouTube or on, or you can download it. All right. So one other thing with the small lettering, when we get into serif letters like Times New Roman and things like that, really our stitches are, it's the serifs are too small to have the serif be in a different direction. So I'm going to go ahead and insert text, and we are going to choose a serif font. Let's see. We'll do the Times New Roman. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so we can really see this. Press OK, and we'll go ahead and zoom out. Actually, we'll zoom 1:1. I'll bring this down. This one may actually do the serifs better because the serifs are very small. Actually, it does the serifs the way that I do want it. So you can see this is a serif right here. And if you see that it all goes in one direction. It doesn't have, it's not turning, to where your serif is going up and down. Let me see if I can find another font that will do that. And I'm just going to scroll through here with my up and down arrow keys till I see a font that I think might. I'm not a big fan of serif fonts anyway, just because I don't like it. Okay. Let's see how this one. This one might go ahead and put them in a different direction, which it does. These are a little bit bigger letters. So with serifs going this way, that is going to be better. But when you're doing small lettering, you don't necessarily want the serif to go in that different direction. In order to do that, now this can be a little bit tricky, but in order to do that, you may have to go in and separate the letters or the letter from the serif. If I look in the outline mode and I right click on it, again, it's one piece, just like we saw before. And if I do zoom in close here, and I go to the angle mode, you can see if I pull this angle away, all I'm doing to pull it away is just put my cursor on top of the green node. It turns into a crosshair, and I'm going to go ahead and pull this down, left click, hold and drag, left click, hold and drag, and you can see kind of that artificial cut line. With that, it's almost treating it like two different sections in the angle view. I can't move this angle up here. If I move my cursor up, I can't go any further. and that's where I'm coming into a problem here. You know, and I could move these angles. You know, we could do a couple of things, and I'll show you. But one thing I do want to take a step back and look at angles. Stitch angles on a satin stitch are going to follow, or I'm sorry, the stitches are going to follow the angles. So if we look at this red line here with the green dot at the top and the bottom, it's going along the outline. The angles don't go in the gray area. Imagine this angle as your stitch. So your stitching is actually going to go up and down, whereas this one right here is going to go left and right, which is proper for this piece. We can see it a little bit better if we, let's go ahead and right click on the E, and I'm going to just zoom in on that particular object. So with our angles do, you know, they do curve. And you can see that as, I call these transitions. Imagine this as your stitches, and as it moves from angle to angle, it's going to transition to the next angle, and then to the next angle, and then to the next angle. So what it's doing, it's transitioning to go around that curve. Here is a good example too, where we can actually change it without having to separate these areas. So if I right click on this B right here, you can see that as the stitches go down here, it's going to have an angle here and then go completely vertical. So if I look in the stitch mode, you can see how those stitches are turning. You can also see here on that E how those stitches are turning. So you can see that here on this angle, if I made that small, it would be, you know, quite a bit for those stitches to turn. I really want, you know, not a lot of turning here, and for a smaller letter, I want the stitches to come straight down all the way across. In order to do that, I can go to the angle view. It's right up here, view angle. I can take that angle right here, put my cursor over it, left click on it, it turns red. When it's red, that's when I can move it, and I can left click, hold, and drag. I can take this angle, and we're dragging it just on the outline. I can left click, hold, and drag, and if I left it as that and I hit go, imagine what the stitches are going to do. See how the stitches are going in that direction? Now I'll go back to the view angle and actually put in an extra angle here, because it does like to have an angle at the beginning and the end. So really what I could do is I could take this and bring it all the way across, and then take this angle right here, bring it all the way across. Let's go ahead and hit go, and now you can see that it's going in a, you know, completely horizontal direction. I'll go back to the angle view. Sometimes when you do have serifs, I like to put an angle all the way at where the start of the serif is. So you actually have two angles, one where the serif, or I'm sorry, I guess one where the main part ends and one where the serif begins. And you can't cross over angles either. So this one, I can't bring it up above this guy. So I'll go ahead and hit go. That's nice and straight. I can even take the endpoint, bring it down here, generate the stitches. But that's more what I want when I'm doing a smaller letter, because I don't want the stitches to turn. And imagine if it turned 90 degrees in this direction, you would have really short stitches. So let's go back to the W up here. And if I right click here to select it, I'll go to my angle view. I am going to take this angle, I'm going to bring it up and completely horizontal. And sometimes this doesn't stitch the way I want it to, so it is playing with it. So I'm going to make those completely horizontal, which I think in this it will look pretty good. I'll hit go, and actually it does look very nice. You can see the difference between this serif and this serif. See how this one is turning? So imagine if we take this, and what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and zoom 1-to-1. I'm going to take this lettering and I am going to go to Edit, Resize. We will go ahead and change this to about 6 millimeters on the Y. The X will automatically change because I have that maintain aspect ratio check marked, and I'll go ahead and press OK. Let's go ahead and zoom in. Now I have not regenerated, so the stitches are the same stitch count, but when I hit go, you can see how much those stitches will separate out from each other. So when you are looking at the serif, it's much better here than it is on the other side. If we take our ruler here and we measure the stitch length, going from here, left click, hold and drag, that's about 2.5 millimeters. Whereas this one right here, left click, hold and drag, that's about 1 millimeter. Little over 1 millimeter, so you can imagine having those close stitch points, you know, you're just not going to, it just is going to look better with a longer stitch because you have more thread exposed on top of the fabric. So with serifs, I do typically want them to extend out, you know, from the regular leg. The other thing I can do is I can separate it. This is, sometimes I do this. It just all depends on how the letter is done, but I'm going to focus on this guy right here. I will right click. When I right click on the area, I am in the outline view. I'm going to go up to outline and I'm going to go to divide with line. Left click here. And I'm going to try and keep it as close as possible right where that division should be. I make a left click on one side and a left click on the other side. I have to make sure that I am outside those gray areas because if I'm not, it won't make that line. I'll hit enter. I'll press escape to get out of the tool. Right click off to the side to deselect, and now you can see these two are separated. So if I look at it too, you can see there's a little bit of a dip right here. And before I even generate stitches, I do like to go to my edit mode, check out these nodes, and really I don't want all these nodes in here because it could, the program could see a turn because it is kind of coming out a little bit. Now this is very minor, but sometimes the program sees it as a turn and puts a, you know, a horizontal stitch in here. Let's just see what happens. I'll hit the go button. You can see that horizontal stitch in there. Big thing is I can see that horizontal stitch. It is trying to separate it. So I'm going to hit the undo button. And actually, let's keep it as is, as I'll show you how you can get over this hump if this happens. We'll go back to the outline view, and we can do this a couple of different ways. I am going to go to the edit mode, and I can adjust this with a line, or I can right click on the point. You can see my angles here. I'll hit delete point. I'll say yes. Right click, delete point, I'll say yes. The reason it's giving me unexpected results is because it did have that artificial cut line in there. The other thing I can do is I can go up to outline and adjust with the line, and I can go from this corner to this corner, left click, put my cursor over that line and left click. It's saying it's self-crossed, and again, it's because it's doing that artificial cut. I say yes. When that happens, right click off to the side. Now I hit the go button. Even though I fixed it, it'll still have that horizontal stitch right there. If I go into the view angle, you can still see it. So what I need to do is I need to have the program reset. I'll change the satin stitch to a complex fill, and then I'll change it back to a satin stitch, and now it's reset and it doesn't have that horizontal stitch in there anymore. If I want to, I can change it back to the small lettering by hitting load, find that small lettering setting, hit open, apply, and OK. And there we go. So you know, that can happen when you are dividing. Just be aware in your angle view. So now you can see I do not have that anymore. So after I separate it, I can then take these angles and move them and do it this way. There is another option here, but we'll keep that as is. I'll go ahead and hit go. We'll generate the stitches, and now I've got that serif going in the correct direction. The other thing I can do is if I go to the view outline, I can right click on here. I have separated it. I'm going to go to outline and edit outline mode. And what I can do here is kind of redraw this area. I'm going to add a node there. Well, actually what I'll do is I'll just move this node, left click, hold, and drag, and I'm reshaping this area. And basically what I can do, and sometimes it's hard to do when it's such a small area, I'm just left clicking, holding, and dragging. But because we're working on such a small piece, there's not much room between these two nodes to add a node, so I'll have to kind of finagle it and, you know, move things around. So basically I'm redrawing it, or reshaping it, I should say. Go to my stitch angle. Ooh, I don't like that. Something crazy happened. Let's reset it. And if I go to the outline view, I can then right click, hold, and drag, and control delete. And now I'll hit go, and now it's going horizontal, but it's all one piece. So it looks like we do have a question. I'll go ahead and open that up. Question about, you know, what's better in using the small font. Now, of course, we all have people with specified logos. I just like using a block font, something that doesn't have a serif, because it's just less of a headache. Let's see, let's go ahead and zoom the whole design. But it's just less of a headache. It's a little bit more clear. It all, you know, it can also depend on, again, the logo that you're doing. You can see that we didn't really, with the Times New Roman, we really don't have to do much changes. You know, I would probably change the angle up here on the B, the angle up here on the R, and on the N and on the I, so that the stitching goes, you know, all the way across. But as far as the small lettering goes, I wouldn't have to really change too much. Whereas this one I would have to change a lot more. What you want to look for is that you want to make sure that you have enough room on the inside of letters so that it doesn't close up. If you do need to open them up, you can do that in your outline view. If I go to the outline view, and let's go ahead and zoom in on the A here, and I can right click on this area, I can then go to outline and edit outline mode, and I can move the nodes. I can also kind of utilize my other tools like outline, adjust with an arc, and maybe I want to go from here to here, open it up a little bit. I can then, you know, go in, delete nodes, right click, delete point, right click. So I'm opening that up a little bit. Now I do have a little bit of a closed area here. Generate my stitches. That will open up that inside of the A. Now I might want to go into this area, and you know, I could delete this point. Hit yes. Delete this point. Hit yes. And if I look at the angles here, I'll take the angle and move it across that way. Move it across that way. I'm shortening it up. And there we go. And I'll look at my angles. I do typically want the angle to go all the way across and go. Now, one thing that might be good is when you are doing small lettering, is to maybe save these as an alphabet. And we can do that in our building block mode. And again, of course, I think I have a lot of high hopes for a webinar, but we'll probably have to have a continuation of lettering again, you know, on our next webinar, because I do see that we are running out of time a little bit. So I'm going to go to one-to-one, and you can see, let's zoom on these two. The A on the bottom here is a little bit more open than the A on the top, and that can make a huge difference. And again, it's going to make a big difference with different thread, because the thinner thread is going to give you the less bulk in those areas that have the holes, like the E here. It's a very, very small hole there, so I'd probably want to open it up, and I'd probably you know, want to use that thinner thread. So it is really important to understand the thinner thread and the thinner needle. Okay, so I know we've spent a lot of time on small letters. Again, small lettering is like one of those things that is one of the hardest things to overcome in embroidery, and that's because it can act so different on different fabrics. You know, you can have one fabric and it look 100% perfect, and then you can have another fabric and it look not the same. You know, it can look absolutely atrocious, and it, you know, fabric has different properties. So understanding not only the digitizing aspect, but the aspect of the thread, the needle, the hooping, the backing, the topping, etc., etc. So, you know, keep those in mind. Again, I do encourage you to get, you know, some test 60 weight thread, small needle, you know, get a black or white. You're always going to use black or white. You know, it's a very staple color. You know, get a black or white and then get the smaller needle. So, you know, that's one thing that I do really, really encourage. Okay, so any other questions before we move on? Another thing, and I know I said this in the previous webinar, but I typically don't like to go below 1/4 of an inch as far as lettering goes. And it's not so much the stitching aspect, but more of the legibility aspect. You know, you go really, really small, and you're, you know, even smaller, and you're going to have to really bring that up close to your eyes to see, you know. It's just one of those things. It's just like logo design. You know, you want things to be clear and concise, and you want to make it legible. You know, there are people who have logos with, you know, the script that looks like it's laying down on its side, and sometimes you may have to change the logo a little bit, or the lettering a little bit, or have something lay out a little bit different in order to make it legible. You know, some people will have a design and their lettering underneath, but the lettering underneath, maybe it's like 6 words and each word is like 12 letters. You know, we've all seen that. Sometimes you might have to take that text and break it up into 2 different lines to be a little bit more legible. And that's something that you do have to educate your customer on too. You know, it's like, well, you do want to be noticed and you want to be remembered. So let's make sure that people can read this when you're shaking their hand. You know, it's part of graphic design, and it's also part embroidery design. So think about what's going to look good and what's going to be legible too. You know, that's a big, big thing. Because if it's not legible, I mean, you might as well just embroider a straight line on it, you know, because, you know, you can go as small as you want, but it's not going to matter unless you can read it. So that's a big thing, you know, look at it that way too. So look at it from the design aspect and not just the embroidery aspect. There are things that I have done that is really, really, really tiny lettering. That's a tag on the inside of a sport coat or something like that. And, you know, you might read that once. But, you know, talking about left chest logos that are, or something on a hat, something that's going to be seen obviously way more often than the inside of a suit jacket, you're going to want it to be legible from, you know, a decent distance. So keep all that in mind. You know, this all kind of ties together. Okay, so the next thing we're going to go over, we're going to have to put the building block thing aside, and that's well, we'll see if we'll have time. But the next thing I want to go over is the 3D embroidery. We're going to go to a new design. The 3D embroidery is a very popular technique that has been popular for years and years and years. That's something that's not going away. So what 3D embroidery is, it's a technique of using a foam. Usually it's a very dense foam. You can get this from different suppliers. I do know Madeira carries the foam, as well as other embroidery supplies. So maybe you want to order some embroidery foam while you're at it. Now there's craft foam that you see at like Walmart and Target and things like that. That's not as dense. You can use it. I've seen people use it before, and sometimes they use 2 and 3 layers of it. But if you take foam from like an embroidery supplier versus like craft foam, and you squeeze it between your fingers, you're going to notice a difference. It's way more dense from the embroidery supply side. And that's really helpful because, like, if you've ever gotten a hat and it's a 3D embroidery and you push on the stitches, there's not much bounce back, or it doesn't go in very much. Whereas if you use craft foam, you can definitely tell a difference. So I encourage using the embroidery foam because it is more dense, and there's different size foam. There's 2 and 3 millimeters, and that foam is going to give you a different dimension. Typically people are using the 2 millimeter one. So you might want to order a sheet or 2 of it just to experiment with if you haven't done it before. And it's kind of fun, but the thing with foam, it's really not a hard technique. It's just understanding, why we need to do certain things. So with embroidery foam, whenever you make a needle penetration into it, it's cutting it, it's perforating it. So what happens is that when you do the needle penetrations on the foam, you're making the perforated line, in a sense, so you can tear the excess foam away. So the foam goes underneath the stitching, underneath the lettering, or I'm sorry, underneath the thread. And with it going underneath the thread, you want to use a satin stitch. And that's because the satin stitch will go from, depending on the angle, from side to side, and not put stitches in between. Once you put a stitch onto the foam, it either, like I said, it perforates it, or it kind of pushes it down. So typically we want to keep the foam clear of stitches unless we do it on the edges. And the edges, of the foam, that's where we want to tear it away. So typically with foam, we do not want an underlay. Sometimes we want a placement stitch, kind of like what we do with applique. With applique, it's a 3-step process, in that you have a placement stitch, a tack down stitch, and a cover stitch. But with foam, sometimes you do want a placement stitch so you know where to put the foam down. Something that I learned a couple of years ago is that when you do put the foam down, people have different ways of putting it down, and typically we are doing foam on caps. If you take a rubber band, just a regular rubber band, and you place the foam down on top of the cap, where the stitching does not occur, you can put a rubber band around the cap on top of the foam. So, you just kind of take your rubber band and put it around there, and sometimes people will put it at the top and bottom of that foam to keep it in place. Typically when the machine starts stitching the foam really doesn't move much. You'll kind of see that. But if you do want that extra, I guess, anchor in a sense, then you can use the rubber bands. The other thing is that you can use the sticky spray. I don't really like using the sticky spray for foam because the foam does tend to stay where it is, once you start stitching. And the rubber bands do quite well, with it. You can also use tape, and just tape the sides of the foam down onto the material, just as long as you make sure that your needle's not going to go through it. So that's where the placement stitch kind of comes into play. And the placement stitch is going to tell you where to place that foam. So let's take a letter. And we can do this, with any, any design really, but this is where we are going to understand and apply the settings on a letter. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a pretty big letter. I'm just going to use, let's use an Arial black. Typically our letters are going to be a couple of inches tall. Let's do something simple for now, where I don't have to do any capping, and we'll do an O, okay? And this will be good. So I will do a capital O. I'll go ahead and press OK. So I chose my settings before I input my letter, and when I do that, I don't have to highlight the letter. If you choose your settings after you input the letter, make sure you highlight the letter and then change your settings. And what I mean by that is that your font type, your size, and things like that. So we'll go ahead and generate the stitches. When we generate the stitches, we're going to go ahead and zoom in. And I do see, now I think I still had that small lettering stitch selected. Whoops. Yeah, I had that small lettering stitch selected. So let's go back to the default stitches. We'll hit load. I will go ahead and hit default. Apply it, and OK. So what we have here is we do have underlay. I'm going to zoom in even further. There's your underlay right there, and you've got travel stitches. And if we look at that underlay, and we look at the needle penetrations, to turn on your needle penetrations, that's this icon here at the top, or you can go up to view and then needle penetrations. So we can see those needle penetrations. So everywhere that you see those dots, that's where the needle is going to strike the foam. We want the foam to have needle penetrations on this side and on this side only. Otherwise, it's going to mat down the foam, or it's going to cut the foam. Now you can see here too, it's got needle penetrations, and if we look at the 3D view, it's actually separating the satin stitch with that, let's see, what is it called again? I'm sorry. It's the break long stitch. So it's breaking the long stitch, and with that, it is creating kind of an indentation, and on top of it, it's going to put stitches on top of the foam. So we'll get out of the 3D view. And so the first thing I'd like to do is eliminate the underlay altogether. Actually, let's take a step back. Let's first make a placement stitch. It's pretty easy to make a placement stitch. With something this thick and this wide, I like to do a border, but on the interior of these blue and white flashing lines, so that it sits on the inside so that my stitches cover on top of it. Now this stitch is going to be stitched down before I even place the foam. It's going to show me where to place the foam. So I'm going to hit the zoom all so we can see the design. I'm going to turn the needle penetrations off for right now. When I right click on the area, it is selected, and I can do this in any view. It doesn't matter if I'm in angle view, outline view, or stitch view, and we did cover this a little bit last time. I am going to go up to stitch and create outline from area edges. When I do that, it asks me what kind of border I want to make. I only want it to be a run border. I don't need anything else because it's just showing me where to place my foam. I do want to do all borders because I want to do the inside and the outside. I really could do the outside border only because, the foam's going to cover this anyway, but I just kind of like seeing it. So we'll do all borders, and the offset at 0 is going to be right on this line, that blue and white flashing line. I need to make the offset negative because I want it to go inside the stitching. So I'm going to make it, depending upon how big your lettering is and how wide it is, this can change. But here I'm going to make it a -1.5. I am working in millimeters. So if you're working in inches and you put a -1.5, the program may not like you. So we'll go ahead and press OK. And when we press OK, you can see now it's going on the interior. It is going to put it on the same, or I'm sorry, it will put stitches in that are the same color as the area. So before I even generate my stitches, I'm going to hit the color button down at the bottom. I'll left click on that. I'll change the color to a different color. And this is important too because I want to make sure I put a stop after my placement stitch goes so I can put the foam down. So I'll go ahead and press OK. Now right click off to the side. So now we see that we have this placement stitch, but it's actually stitching on top of the blue because it's stitching after, and that's because I input it after. So let's take the placement stitch and move it to the first position. So it stitches first, and then we want the blue to stitch on top. Now with it being different colors, when I go to my machine, I can input a stop on the machine. There is a stop function in the program. I don't like working with that stop function because it's also a color change. So if I input a stop function and a color change, it looks like it has two color changes. Just look at color changes. Don't worry about the stop sign. Because remember, a DST, when it's in the machine, it's read as stops and not actually color changes. So that's why you input your different colors. But you would want to input a stop in between the placement stitch and the cover stitch of the foam. So to move this to the top, the easiest way I think is just to take the O, the blue O, and once it is selected, I can, you can see in the frame, I'll right click and I'll just say move to bottom, and it just shifts everything. Right click off to the side, you can generate our stitches, and now you can see it even has a traveling stitch, which is fine. It doesn't have a trim in between the two now. The travel stitch is fine because the foam's not down on it yet. Okay, so let's go back to the foam part and the what we need for that foam. So the stitches on the edge are going to create that perforation. We don't want underlay, so that's the first thing I want to take away. And as we saw before, we do have that long stitch being broken because it exceeds that 10 millimeter length. So if I go to my ruler here and I measure my stitch length, you can see that it's, about 14 millimeters, which is quite, quite wide. It's going to break that long stitch because the long stitch, the maximum step length in my settings is 10 millimeters. So it's exceeding the 10 millimeters, so it's breaking at one time. You can see that right here. Press escape to get out of the tool. So I will right click on this area and I will go to the stitch settings here. And it is on satin because it is a piece of text. Fastest way to turn off the underlay is click here, this use underlay. I'll go ahead and hit apply, and it's taking the underlay out. One thing, let's go ahead and hit OK. And one thing I do like to do, so I'm not confused, is to make these red areas invisible. So I'm going to left click on this eyeball here, and that will put an X through it, and that will make the area invisible. That way I'm more concentrating on this. Now these areas are still there, but it's, it's just hidden from view. So the next thing, let's go ahead and zoom this whole design. I can see that I do have that long stitch being broken, so let's change that first. We'll go back to our stitch settings. I'm going to go to the satin tab, and I'll deselect break long stitch, and I'll apply that. So now you can see that long stitch is no longer, or that, I'm sorry, the broken stitch is no longer there. But I do have some travel stitches, and I also have some stitch shortening. The stitch shortening, we can turn it off. It kind of depends all on your design. It kind of depends on, you know, how tight this interior is. If I turn it off all the way and I hit apply, it does go all the way in there. But, you know, we do have to make this even more dense, meaning the stitches are going to be closer to each other. So I see all these stitches on the interior here, and that may not be the best thing to do. On some other letters it may be better, but I am going to keep the auto stitch shortening. I'll hit apply, but I'm going to change the percentage. Typically I will go up to maybe about 95% and down to 30 or 40%. I'll hit OK, and then I'll hit apply. You do still have some shortening. Let's go back to this percentages. Let me go to 90% and 40%, hit OK, and then apply. And, you know, I can play with this a little bit. Let's do 45%. I'll apply that. And I am getting some shortening here. So, you know, even though it is shortening, and you know, as it goes around a curve on the interior, it is going to shorten those stitches. It probably needs it there because, you know, you don't want all your stitches going in here and creating kind of a hole. It's something to experiment with, but to know what that is a big thing. So if the percentages, the shortened percentage, it's going to shorten the stitches 90%. If let's see, this is so difficult for me to explain sometimes, but it's going to shorten the stitches 90% of the original length, or, you know, in a sense 10%, and the minimum that it's going to see is at 45%, and that's going to be according to the length of the stitches. It's something to experiment with. Sometimes I turn it completely off, and sometimes I just change the percentages. Okay, so with that, you can see that we do have travel stitches here. You can see that for some reason it kind of travels out here. You know, it starts here, travels in, probably does some stitching, and, you know, it's kind of funky the way that it does. This little piece right here gives me a little bit of an indication, and that this is where a meeting point is. So if I take my endpoint and bring it up here and hit go, I've eliminated the travel stitches here. Let me see if I move my out point up here and I hit go, if I eliminate those. And I got lucky there. It seemed like that's where it liked that meeting point. Let me go to the out point here, and you can see, you know, it's going to travel. Now, if you can't get the in and out point just right, let's say I put it down here and hit go. See how it's doing this travel stitch all the way around? If I don't get it right, one thing that I can do is separate it. If I go to the outline view and I go to outline and divide with a line, I can go in here and divide the area. And I can divide it basically anywhere I want in here. Hit enter, press escape to get out of the tool. So now in a sense it's like a snake, and it's got a head and a tail, and it's just going around in a circle. So I'll go ahead and hit my go button, and now I kind of have two sides to this. I've got it, you know, I've got the in point here and the out point here. I'll hit go, and now I've, you know, taken that and I've separated it. So I can move the in and out point, you know, to the head and tail and generate the stitches, and now I do have to where I have no travel stitches. So those are two big things that you want to make sure that you have. The last thing here is, if we go to our property settings, we want to at least double the density, and I go even beyond that. So if I go to the satin stitch here, the density is at 0.4 millimeters. I like to take it to about 0.16. So density is the spacing between the rows of stitching, if you go down in number, you're going to have less space. If you go up in number, you're going to have more space. The reason you need so much density is for the needles to cut that foam so that you can tear it away. And after that foam is torn away, and you might see some little stragglers kind of coming through, if you take a heat gun or take a steamer to the foam, it'll shrink that foam up a little bit. And that's very, very big. So make sure, you know, even a hair dryer that's got like a hot setting, but if you are using a heat gun, don't go too hot. You might burn the hat, the fabric, or even, you know, you might discolor the thread, you know, for example, if you're using white thread. So first of all, I'm going to hit apply here, and you're going to see it darken up quite a bit. And you can see now I've got all those stitches. Again, I like to go to about 0.16, between 0.16 and 0.18. The pull compensation. The pull compensation is kind of the last part of it here. And the pull compensation, if you remember from the small lettering, we took pull compensation away. I do like to add pull compensation, especially on hats for 3D, because you're stitching on a curved surface, so you're having more, you know, displacement in a sense. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to increase it. It's going to increase it on either side of the stitch angle. So for this option, it's going, you know, on both sides. So I'm going to increase it to about 0.5. You can go a little bit more if you want. I'll apply that, and you can see it gets a little bit thicker. Pull compensation, you know, I do like to increase it. Those are the main settings that you want to change. And let's turn these areas back visible. And that's basically ready for foam. Again, like I said, foam is not very difficult to do. It's just that you need to make sure that you understand the properties of it. We are going to next talk about how we would do a letter that you might need to cap off the ends, like a C. So the question, it looks like we have a question. And so to save the webinar and watch it again, we are recording it. It's going to be available on our YouTube. And then there's a link that we send out that's a zipped file. And with that zip file, it's rather large because it's a long video, but you can save it, and then you can unzip it and then play it in like a media player such as Windows Media Player. Actually, I don't think they make QuickTime anymore, but different media players, because it's an MP4 file. So you should be able to save it just from that link onto your computer. And if you have any questions, you can always email me, and I can help you through it. Oh, one more thing. Well, let's get to the other pieces, and then maybe next webinar we'll talk about outlining for foam. Basically, with outlining for foam, you want to do the outline first, you know, like a satin stitch outline, and then do the foam on top of it. And you usually want your outline to be pretty fat so that, you know, you're going to see that outline after you put the foam on top. So let's look at this design. It's going to stitch the red outline first, which is going to be our placement stitch, and then it's going to do the blue stitching on top. So it's going to stitch this. You want to program a stop into the machine. So when you go to the optimized stitching order, and needle 1 is going to be, let's say, 6, and then needle 2 is going to be 4. When you get to needle 2, you want to hit the more button at the bottom and hit the input stop. You know, it's a little stop sign with a plus. And that will stop the machine before the blue starts stitching. That way you can put your, you know, cut your foam to where it's going to cover that piece enough, make it a little bit bigger so you ensure that you're covering that area, and then you can start, and you can put the rubber band around like I said, or you can put tape on either side. Some people will pin it, but make sure that it's not going to stitch wherever you put that material. And then and then you can go ahead and start the machine, and as the machine goes, you'll see those needle points make those perforation. You'll start to see it kind of rip away from it. So after it's done, you take it off, you can rip away that extra foam, and then take, if you do see those like kind of like little pieces kind of sticking out, heat will shrink it a bit. So go ahead and use that heat on there. So let's go to a new design. And again, actually, let's go back to this design. If I right click on this area right here and I go to my stitch settings and I want to save this setting as a puff or 3D, I will find it. I believe it's in here, 2 to 3 millimeters. I'll hit save. I'll hit yes, I do want to replace it, and okay. So now let's go to a new design. I'll go ahead and choose the 2 to 3 millimeter puffy foam. I'll go to insert a letter, and this time we're going to do a C. So I'll do a capital C. We're going to deselect this because we want to do the puffy foam. And it defaults to that because that's the last thing we had put in. I'll go ahead and press OK and generate my stitches. And if we go ahead and zoom in here, actually it did not take that for some reason. Let's go to the settings. We'll hit puffy foam, OK. I'll apply that and OK. So now we do have those settings in there. I can see that the density changed to 0.16. But if we look at our needle penetrations, I do see kind of a running stitch in here. And that's because the endpoint is there. Let's go ahead and go 1 to 1. I'll take the endpoint, bring it here, and the out point, bring it here. So it's going to stitch from this end to this end without having to travel. I'll hit the go button, and now you can see I don't have any travel stitches. The thing about this is that if we look at the needle penetrations, it's only on the outside here and the inside here. No penetrations on this. So if I stitch this, it's not going to, rip away at this point. So again, first things first, we do want to create a, I'll go ahead and hit A on my keyboard, zoom in on that object so it's close as possible to my screen. I do want to create a placement stitch. So with it selected, I can go up to stitch on the main menu bar, or I can right click inside the area and create outline from area edges. Again, I want to do a run. This only has an outside border, so it doesn't really matter if I change it to all borders or not. And the offset, this time I'll just do like a -1.25. Sometimes you can play around with it, see what's best for you. You can always delete it and restart if you want. So I'll go ahead and press OK. It created that outline. I'll go ahead and change it, something different, press OK, and it puts the stitch in there. So again, we want to change the order of it. So I can, this is already selected, I can right click on the inside here and move to top. I'll right click off to the side, and now you can see the red stitches first. Again, we want to put in our stop. Okay, so the problem that we have here is that it's not going to put needle penetrations here. So what we have to do is we have to create caps, where we're capping the ends here. The thing about a cap is that you do not want to, what's it called? You want to kind of follow the same technique or the same settings as we have in here. But you also don't want a cap to be too small in that your stitching is, less than 1 millimeter. So you want to make your cap, a pretty decent size. And the best way to do this, I like to go into the outline view. And if we'd like to turn off that red, let's go ahead and hit the eyeball with the X through it. And what I'm going to concentrate on is this piece right here. We have to create stitches that are going to go perpendicular to our current stitching. So our stitching is going left and right, where I need to make it go more up and down. I am going to use the Create Satin Side to Side. And in using this, if I left click on it, I'm going to leave all this as is. And the way this works is that I am going to create a point just with a left click. That's my starting point. I'm going to set the width as well as the stitch angle as soon as I create my second point. And the way I do this, I don't want it to be a complete rectangle. I kind of want it to angle in a bit. So I will make another left click, and again, that makes the stitch angle along with the width, and it goes back towards side one. So I'm going to come all the way across, and you can see I'm going just to the inside of this area. Left click, and I want to try to make it as equal as possible, and left click, and I hit enter. So when I do that and I hit escape, you can see that all my settings, because I have this already up here when I am manually punching, all the settings are the same. So if I look at it right now, let's go ahead and one-to-one, and if I go ahead and put on my true view or my 3D view, which I just put T, this is stitching on top. So I do want to make sure that stitches, first. But let's go ahead and finish up the end of this. I wasn't paying attention about how wide my stitches are, so let's go ahead and let's go zoom in even further and turn off the 3D, right click. And sometimes I will make this a little less dense. I don't need it as dense. Maybe I'll take it to a 0.25, which I can do right down here on my quick properties. And it is selected, so I'll take it to 0.25, hit enter. It's still pretty dense, but it's not necessary to make it as dense, maybe 0.2. So now it's making those needle penetrations. Let's see how, I right clicked off to the side. Let's take our ruler. Let's see how long these stitches are. Okay, that's a great length. We could even make it smaller. You don't want them too long because you will see kind of an indentation right here. So let's go to the outline view, right click on it, go to my edit outline mode, and maybe make it a little bit smaller. Maybe I made it a little bit too big. Generate the stitches. I'll go back. It looks like my stitch angles changed a little bit because I changed the shape. I will go ahead and grab the stitch angles, making sure that they're going in the appropriate directions, and these are just left click, hold, and drag, and then generate my stitches. So I have made this one already. Now, utilizing the layout tools and the copy and paste, I can, make it, take this one and just utilize it for the bottom. So let's go ahead and hit Zoom All Design. With this right click selected, I'll go ahead and go to Edit and Copy, Edit and Paste. I'll bring it down here, and if I go here at the bottom of my screen, I have a mirror horizontal. So I'll mirror it. Now it's not quite at the right angle, so I'll just kind of line it up, left click, hold, and drag, and then I can left click again inside that area. And when I left click inside again, I get my rotating tools and I can rotate it. So again, it's important to have kind of the same settings. You want your in and out points to be at opposite ends. You want the density to be, a little bit more dense. You want to make sure that you're not having any traveling stitches or underlay. So let's go ahead and hit go, and now I've got my two caps. But the two caps, again, have to stitch before the main part. So I can take this seat right here, right click, and move to bottom. Now when I do that and I hit go, between number 2 and 3, or between the caps, it might put in a travel stitch. So if I hit go, I can see, yep, it did put in the travel stitch. You can see that here too. I'm just going to go ahead and put in a trim there, making sure I don't have that travel stitch, regenerate. And now I can see that I don't. Actually, I do still have a travel stitch, and that's because from here, it's going to start stitching up here. So let's do this. Let's take the out point of this guy up here, and then the C, I will change the in and out point. So actually the travel is very minimal, and I still don't need a cut. So it takes out a travel stitch, takes out a trim, because I put them at opposite ends, because of the way that I am routing, the stitching here. So these are the big things that you need to know for the for the foam. Good question. What size needle do I need for foam? When you're doing hats, I typically recommend a sharp 80-12, because the 80-12s, it's good for the hat. 75-11 is good too, but more of a sharp needle, because you're typically stitching on a twill type of fabric, and you're going through, a couple different layers. So that's what I do recommend. Again, if you have those needles, get some foam, get some hats that may have, that are extra, order some extra hats and experiment, play with it, because that's the best way you're going to learn is, one, understand the technique, and two, apply that technique, to different designs and play with it. Now, I know we're going over time. We are going to go over one more thing. We did talk a little bit about that, division line. I'm going to go over it real quickly, and we'll review it on the next webinar too. So if I go to the insert text, I'm going to go ahead and input a capital F. Let's deselect that small lettering stitch. Okay, and generate my stitches. So if we look at this, if I right-click on this, it is my default, and I'm going to go, I have to check that out. I don't know why it's not doing the, oh, that might be in my view properties. Sorry, just talking out loud. Here we go. We'll hit OK, and then apply, and then press OK. We're going to go ahead and turn on the needle penetrations, but you can see I've got this travel stitch, and we have, opposite directions here. So with this design, or with this letter, I would want to make caps, and I would want to also divide it. I would want to divide it here where those those stitch angles are going in opposite directions, perpendicular to each other. So with it right-click selected, we will go to our view outline, and then we'll go to outline and divide with line. And when we divide with line, and I'll go ahead and just kind of do it a little bit in front so we can see, what we saw before with that W. We can see this little problem that's going to happen. I hit enter. I always check this before I generate my stitches. I'm going to right click off to the side. So if I right click here, you can see how it has this area kind of jutting out, and I can also check in my outline view with the edit mode. I always go in, like I said, and fix this if necessary, where I can right click, delete the points, but I want to make sure it's a straight line. If it is not a straight line, it will create that horizontal stitch. So let's hit go, and now you can see I've got no horizontal stitches. This area, it hasn't been generated because I only had this piece selected. So let's hit go here. And sometimes what I'll do is you can see there's a little bit of a gap. I will go into the outline view and edit outline mode, and I will bring that letter and overlap it. Now it's telling me that it's, for some reason, I'm not sure why, but I'll hit go, and let's hit go again. Let's go to our stitch angles, right click on here, and let's refresh it. Let's go to complex fill, change it back to a satin, and that's better. So it's overlapping, but again, it's overlapping on top. And actually, before I started cutting this up, I should have done my placement stitch. No big deal. We could do it again later. So I just left clicked, hold and drag, and you can drag that square up or down, and I have it stitching first. So let's go ahead and zoom out. I have this, the way that this stitches, I'm going to have the in point stitch here, the out point stitch here, because really what I could do is I could put a cap here and have the out point of the cap over here. Then if I right click here, you know, you do want the caps to stitch first over here and over here, and then I can, you know, change those in and out points. Now I have my in point down here, but my out point's here, so you can see why that's traveling. It's going to travel up and then back down. So let's take that in out point, right click off to the side. Let's go ahead and generate. It may put, you know, it took out the trim. I want to put the trim back in. Let's go ahead and generate. Oh, it's trying to route it in the most efficient way, but I got to fight it. So now I don't have those travel stitches. So with something like this, you would not need to put a cap here or anything like that, because even though on this segment you don't have the capping stitches, you know, on this end, but this segment will accommodate for it. So we'll cut it for you. Okay, so I know, again, we went over time. That's kind of the basic technique of the 3D. If you do have questions, you know, please email me. Please, you know, you can give me a call, and I'd be happy to help. So again, we did record it, so you'll have this in an email pretty soon. Next webinar will be kind of, again, a continuation, and if you do have any feedback or if there's anything that you'd like to learn, please let us know. Please let me know, and we'll try to fit that in. I've already gotten a couple things that people would like to see, so I'm going to try and incorporate that into you know, some of our webinars. So again, really appreciate you guys coming. I hope you learned something from it. Again, if you have any questions, email me at Andrea, ANDREA, at zskmachines.com. So I'm going to stick around for a little bit. If you do have any questions, you know, I'll stick around for a couple minutes. But if not, you can go ahead and exit the meeting. And again, thanks for coming.